Hi there, my name is Robin Collins and today I'm going to be sharing information relating to non-oxidative colour and specifically to the origin of colour and the theory behind colour. So, the theory of colour. What is colour? Colour is light. Light being absorbed or reflected. So if you're using your resource or you're looking in your resources, you will see that there is some information on pages 3, 4 and 5 in terms of the action of light in relation to colour. So colour is light being absorbed in reflection. So when we see white, we see all colours being reflected. If we see black, we see all colours being absorbed. If you were to see something blue, you would see blue being reflected and all other colour being absorbed. So what would you see if you saw orange? You would see all colours being absorbed except red and yellow. So remembering that when we see colour, it is the process of light being absorbed and reflected. Let's look at the colour wheel. Most of us will know that our primary colours are, yes, red, yellow and blue. When those are mixed together, they create secondary colours, and those are orange, green and violet. When those colours are mixed together, they'll produce tertiary colours. So in hairdressing we have quite a variety of colour processes as services, and it's really important that we understand the mixations of the different colours to produce our hair colour. If we're referring to the colour star, and we've already been through our primary colours being red, yellow and blue, and our secondary colours being orange, green and violet, our tertiary colours fall in between. So we would have a red-orange, an orange-yellow, a yellow-green and so forth. When we talk about warm and cool colours, we talk about splitting the colour wheel in half. Now what's really important is that we split the colour wheel at the correct place. All of our warm colours are those colours that are associated with fire and things that are warm. So we see warm colours as our red, orange and yellow. Our cooler colours, on the other hand, are those things that we see that are cooler. So water and those sorts of ice, glaciers, those types of things. We have cool colours which are blue, violet and green. Our tertiary colours, our cool and warm colours and the tertiary colours, are those that fall on either side. And so though this particular colour here that you see is yellow-green, it will err on this side of the colour wheel to a warm yellow-green or a cool yellow-green. Whereas up through here where we see our violet-red, on this side we have a red-red-violet, which makes that colour more warm, and on this side we have a violet-violet-red, which makes it more cool. So looking at your colour wheel and separating it completely in half, you'll divide warm from cool colours. Awesome! That's going to be really important when you're actually preparing and you're selecting colour for your clients. You're going to have to take into consideration their own natural reflex, and you're going to need to bring the information from this area into the play when you're selecting your colours. Which leads me to counter colours. So counter colours are those that are opposite on the wheel. They are used to counter an unwanted reflect or to counteract a reflect which might push through or show through a client's natural reflect. So if I was to ask you what would the counter colour for yellow be, you would look directly opposite on the colour wheel, and it is, thank you, that's right, violet. If I was to ask you how am I going to counter a red reflect, then you're going to be needing to use a mixation that contains green. Obviously to counter orange, any brassy tones, you're going to then use a blue in the mixation to counter those colours. So rule of thumb is that opposites counter or neutralise unwanted reflex, and that's a really important skill for you to have. Further in this topic we're going to be discussing the impact of colour or non-oxidative colour, particularly on the hair shaft. So when we're talking about non-oxidative colour in a temporary form. We're talking about your water rinses, your mousses, and those colours that we have in our industry that are just going to last one shampoo. The impact of that particular product on the hair shaft is on the cuticle only. So if you bring in your knowledge of the hair shaft from the other units that you have been looking at, or the other topics you've been looking at, then you need to think about the layers of the hair shaft, being your cuticle on the outside, your cortex, which is where your chemical processes take place, and your medulla, which is the very central area which serves no real purposes and is made of air and air sacs. So, as I was saying, we're talking now about the impact of temporary colour or a non-oxidative colour on the hair shaft. All colour contains colour molecules. We need colour molecules to see colour, and we need colour molecules to coat or penetrate the hair to produce colour in our work. So in hairdressing, the temporary colour molecules are the largest molecules of all colour molecules, and they won't enter the hair shaft because they're too big. So they will coat the cuticle and sit on the outside. Now that is why they only last one shampoo. They just literally sit on the outside of the hair shaft and will be shampooed off in the next shampoo. Another non-oxidative colour that we use in hairdressing is a semi-permanent colour, and though it's becoming, there's a much wider range of colours available and it's becoming more widely used, a lot of stylists don't use semi-permanents at all. While I produce a really nice range of semi-permanent colours, and so do some of the fudge and crazy colours and some of those more sort of neon type brands as well. So it pays, if you're not familiar with semi-permanent colours as a stylist, it will pay you to have a little bit of research or make a little bit of investigation to see what's available for you. Semi-permanent colour has more longevity, so it will last longer than one shampoo. You will get perhaps 6 or 8 shampoos out of a semi-permanent colour. When you apply that colour, the colour molecules act slightly differently. So in a semi-permanent colour, we're looking at colour molecules that are large and medium. The medium colour molecules are the ones that will actually sit slightly beneath the cuticle scales, and they'll be trapped on the underside of the cuticle. And the reason they can do this is because they're slightly smaller than the large ones that sit on the outside. Now because those ones become trapped on the underside of the cuticle, they then last in the hair for longer than one shampoo. And as I've said, you can get up to 8 shampoos out of a semi-permanent colour. Now that's going to depend greatly on the texture and porosity of the hair, and you will develop a knowledge of this as you learn about those characteristics. Today we're focusing on the colour. I'm going to be also talking with you about the characteristics of non-oxidative colour and how that impacts on our industry. So we all know what permanent colour does, you know, that there's permanent colour services that last and grow out of the hair. Well, non-oxidative colour is colour that isn't chemical and it just shampoos out of the hair. So non-oxidative colour has no chemical developers or ammonia. If you're mixing two products together with a 1.5% or 1.9%, it's not a temporary or semi-permanent colour. That goes more into the midway range. So in this particular topic, we're going to be looking and focusing on your temporary and semi-permanent colour characteristics. So some of the benefits of those types of products in our industry are that they're really easy to use. There's no mixing, so it's just a case of applying the product according to the manufacturer's instructions. They're gentle on the hair, you don't get a regrowth. It allows the client to change their colour regularly, so if they decide they want to have a slightly cooler colour this week, or in this shampoo, and in the next shampoo they want to have something a little bit brighter, perhaps some warm tones, then they can do that without any impact on the hair because it's non-chemical. So it's a fabulous way just to experiment, and it's great because there's no great commitment. You can have something one week and something different the next, so that's always a benefit. People use it to tone unwanted reflex and use it to mask between colours, between permanent colours. If they can't get in for a permanent colour, you'll often hear of a client saying, oh, I just had to pop something in there just to mask the regrowth while I was waiting for my permanent colour. So that's actually another characteristic of the service. People use them for refreshing and adding shine, and just to actually give themselves a lovely hue or a glow. In the resource that's available at Inditech Online and in your resource books, you'll actually see more characteristics of these two particular types of colour. You need to probably be aware of some of the disadvantages of these colour, and one of those disadvantages is that it doesn't last particularly long. You also don't get any grey coverage from it, so if you're trying to hide some of those grey hairs, you're not going to be able to do that with these particular colours. You'll be able to mask them, maybe camouflage them, but you won't be able to actually cover them. You can't lighten hair with a temporary or a semi-permanent colour. Because it's non-chemical, you cannot go any lighter. So you can only do tone on tone or go slightly deeper. A lot of people that are blonde use the pinks and the mauves and the violets, or the mint greens, or the different neons that are available, and that's part of that whole fun. The downside of that is you're on an ongoing basis having to apply them, because you don't get that longevity out of them. I think it's really important that you look at your resource and you look at what's available to you in this area and in this subject. I'm going to actually move on with how you would work with non-oxidative or temporary colour. So I'm just referring to my notes here. Once you've actually analysed the hair and scalp using your dipetals, density, porosity, elasticity, texture, length and state of the hair and scalp, you would then select and consult with your client an appropriate colour. Now, in a temporary colour, your range is quite limited, so you would have to actually think about the level of the hair before you started selecting your colour. You would have to think about what the client wants. You would have to take into consideration whether there is any existing colour that's going to impact on the colour. So obviously if a client has, that much regrowth with black ends, she's not going to be able to have any colour that's visible on those ends, because black won't reflect any colour. Importantly, when you're selecting your colour, is taking into consideration the client's skin tone and making sure that you're working harmoniously with their skin tone and perhaps eye colour. Definitely when you're selecting your colour, you need to think about the reflect, the natural reflect of the client's hair, in addition to any artificial reflect in the client's hair. So obviously if a client has had a previous colour that they might be growing out, or that they're just tired of and they just want to have something for a change, you would have to take into consideration what that hair is doing. So whether there's a gold reflect throwing through, or whether you've got a red reflect throwing through. If you're trying to cool those off, you are going to have to pay consideration to your complementary or your opposing colours to try and cool those off. If you have an existing cool colour, using temporary colour is going to be very hard to produce a warm tone. You may get a little bit of shift if you use a semi-permanent colour, depending on the brand and the type of reflect that you've got in there. So paying attention to what's existing in the hair, whether it's artificial or natural, in terms of the reflect, is really important when you're selecting your colour. I think it's really important to know as well that just because it's non-chemical doesn't mean it's fail-safe. You need to be aware that some people will react to colour molecules and the content of colour molecules in any product. And it's really interesting if you have a look at some of your products that you have in your salon or in your training provider. A lot of them will say that you need to perform a skin test. Now, a skin test is to determine whether a client is allergic to the colour molecule, or the colour product that you're going to use. So most training providers say, well, you only have to have a skin test if you're having a permanent colour, and most salons are the same. It's really important that you read your manufacturer's instructions, because if your manufacturer says that they recommend it, then it's probably advisable that you actually perform that for the client. Now that's a safeguard. It's so that you don't create an allergic reaction, and people can react quite violently to colour. So if you hop on the internet or you do some research about reaction to hair colour, you'll actually be quite surprised, I'm sure, the amazing reactions that some people have and the distortions in their faces and the effect that it has on the skin and scalp. Remember, just because it's not a chemical colour doesn't mean that it's fail-safe. So read your manufacturer's instructions. If you're recommended to complete a skin test, then you need to do that. Application methods vary as well, and I'm not going to demonstrate application methods because you will do this in practical videos, or you may complete this in your salon. You'll follow your manufacturer's recommendations, and you will also have demonstrations in your training provider. A temporary colour can be applied straight from the bottle, and in a lot of cases, in a lot of salons, that's what happens. For me, I'm a little bit messy when it comes to applying straight out of a bottle, so I like to use a brush in a bowl. So I'll measure out my quantities and I'll apply with an applicator brush as I would any normal colour, just in small sections, a nice even distribution over the head. And then I'm not getting it all over the floor, otherwise if I just put it out of the bottle, it's pretty hard for me to control it. Some people apply it, I have seen it applied, and some people apply it using a cotton swab or using a sponge, and that's quite effective as well, because you can actually get a really nice distribution without it all running down the client's face or all over the floor. Mental note to self, that's probably an option for me, for moi. Mousse forms are really beneficial as well, and if you are completing a colour application in a mousse form, whether it's semi-permanent or whether it's a temporary colour, it's advisable for you to use a comb when you're applying, or a brush. I wouldn't be inclined to just apply mousse to the hair and then massage it through. You really don't have as much control as to where it's going, and you're probably going to find you're going to be wasting your products. So there are spray forms as well. In terms of some of your semi-permanents, there's neon colours that come in spray cans. Those ones generally just really put a thick coating on the hair, and they're often quite gluggy to touch. I'm not sure whether you can work with all of them, but it certainly pays to check that type of product if that's the type of temporary or semi-permanent colour you might be using. In fact, I don't know any semi-permanents that come in a liquid spray, but that's not to say that there wouldn't be one. So have a look, have a research, find out the different types of colours that are available for you in industry. Find out and research the application methods. Use your research book. Look at some of the PowerPoints that are available to you, and any of the practical videos that are available to you as well. So let's just recap on what we've talked about today. First and foremost, we've talked about the origin of colour. That colour is light that's being either absorbed or reflected. We've also looked at the colour wheel. We've looked at the effect of temporary hair colour on the hair shaft, and we've looked at the effect of semi-permanent colour on the hair shaft. We've looked at the analysis of the hair and scalp, or we've talked about the analysis in the hair and scalp, and we've talked about the characteristics of semi-permanent and temporary colour. We've talked about how we would select a temporary or a semi-permanent colour, taking into consideration the client's skin tone, hair characteristics, any pre-existing colour, any areas that are going to impact on the colour selection. We've looked at the counter colours, and we've looked at opposing colours that neutralise unwanted tones. I think an area that's really important to pay attention to is your warm colours and your cool colours, and remember to separate your colour wheel at the correct place. Now this information is going to go with you when you're actually working with all of your colour services, so it's really important that you have a really good understanding and separate it through at the correct place. I would like to think that you've gained some good information from today's video, and I hope that you take this skill and take this knowledge into all of your colour work.